Welcome to A Little Too Quiet. It's the Ferndale Library podcast, and it's brought to you by the Friends of the Ferndale Library. And today I'm joined by a local author, Ferndale's own Donald Levin. Hi, Donald.
How are you doing?
Great. It's so good to see you again. It's your third time on the podcast.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure.
And I think that's just, that's a statement on how long the podcast has been running. This podcast started in January of 2020.
Wow.
Which, feels like an ominous time.
Yeah.
We met in person, the first episode we ever did with you. And then again, sometime later, a year and a half later, over Zoom. So we did a lot of episodes of this podcast over Zoom. I believe now for years, readers will know that you had the Martin Proust mystery series.
Correct.
Which we'll talk a little bit about. But the second appearance I think that you had on this podcast, you were talking to us about Savage City.
Yes.
Which was... let's say in the mystery genre, but historical fiction, possibly more so.
More so, that's right.
Give folks at home a little bit of background about your shift from, tell them a little bit about Martin Proust, the mystery series you worked on, and then your shift into historical fiction with Savage City, and then we'll even talk about another book after that.
It's always a pleasure to be here and talk to you, so thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I had written 7 novels in the Martin Proust mystery series. Mm-hmm. They were standalone books, but part of a larger series with the detective Martin Proust and his son Toby, his partner in crime, as I think of it. And they were set in Ferndale and around the metropolitan Detroit area. The last one came out, I think, in 2020. Yeah. And every time I had finished one of those books, I was always thinking about the next one. And I was thinking, what am I going to do next? And when I got to the last one, which was In the House of Night, I found myself not thinking about what's coming next. And I thought, well, maybe I'm at the end of this. And maybe I need to take a break from it, if not, set it aside forever.
Because that book necessarily didn't have a climactic sequence. It wasn't like a closed door for Martin Proust.
Correct.
But you just felt something.
I felt something, and I felt that I had left him in a good place. Yeah. And his son is profoundly multiply handicapped. And I left, Toby was his name, and I left him in a good place. So I was happy to step away from it for a while. One of the things that people kept asking me throughout the series is, when is Martin going to be happy?
Our detectives ever. Well, I left him in a good place, the final episode anyway. Yeah. So I thought, well, let's think about doing something else. Because you're not just a mystery guy. You had works of dystopic fiction and poetry.
Yes, exactly.
So you had other options.
I did. And I thought I would like to work in a larger canvas than the mystery. Yeah. I wanted to sort of spread out a little bit. I had been reading a lot of James Ellroy, who is the author who wrote the book that the film L.A. Confidential is based on. And he's got a series of books set in L.A. The first series is called the L.A. Quartet, where he's got 4 novels that are set in the 40s, 50s, 60s in L.A. And he brings a number of different characters together in that and sort of mixes them up and has a very, very complex, very complicated series of plots. And he likes to talk about them as all being one long work. And he also he started a second series, the second L.A. Quartet, which he has 2 books out right now. So I was reading these books, and I was very struck by them. And they came at the right time for me, because I was thinking of doing something else. And as I was reading them, I thought, I've never seen anybody do anything like this in Detroit. There are lots of novels in Detroit. There are lots of novels that are series. Todd Esselman's series, for example.
Lord knows Elmore Leonard went there.
And a guy named Elmore Leonard, who I seem to have heard of once in a while. And Stephen Mac Jones, August Snow. Yeah. So there are a lot of books here, but I didn't see something that was sort of a combination of historical novel, literary novel, crime novel, mystery novel, that has a large cast. And I thought, well, I want to do that.
While referencing actual events.
Exactly.
That's the thing.
Exactly. Savage City is based on the Hunger March, the Fort Hunger March, that happened in March of 1932, and it was a march where, in the sort of depth of the Depression, unemployed Ford workers marched toward the Rouge plant, hoping to present Henry Ford with a list of demands for food, for fuel during the winter, for health care, those kinds of things.
Human rights.
Human rights, exactly. And before they got there, to present him this list, the Dearborn police opened fire on them and killed 5 of them, and wounded a number of others. It's also called the Ford Massacre.
Yeah. I mean, I know Kent State, but I hadn't actually heard of it until I read your book. Yeah. It's kind of like a lesser told tale.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I wanted to focus the action on that, and that becomes sort of the center for 4 different characters who are fictional, who come together around that event. And as you pointed out, that event itself is actual,
right.
And there are a number of actual people, real people, who walk through the book. Henry Ford, Father Coughlin, those kinds of characters,
sure.
As well as the fictional characters that I created. So I enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. In fact, I said to myself at one point while I was writing it, man, I really like to do this.
And I imagine writing it is possibly as compelling as reading it, because if we hadn't mentioned yet, it's structured in that it's a succession of chapters. We'll check in with one character.
Yep.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Yep.
Then loop back.
Yep.
And then it goes on.
Yep. Each chapter is written from the point of view of one character. And the research that I did a tremendous amount of research, was enjoyable.
Yeah.
It was fun. It was fun to do. As was the writing. So people seemed to like it.
Yeah.
And I thought, what am I going to do next
Sure.
after I finish this book? And I was talking with a member of the Lawrence Street Gallery, who it's a local art gallery. Mm-hmm. My wife is a member.
Yeah.
And I was talking with one of her colleagues, and she said, I have one big criticism of this book. Mm. And I thought, okay, well, lay it on me. Mm. And he said it ended. He wanted to hear more about the book. He wanted to hear more about the people. He wanted to see what was going to happen with this couple that I had matched up. Mm-hmm. So I thought, well, maybe it's time to really think seriously about doing that Detroit quartet, or the Detroit trilogy, or however it turns out. So I started to think about, well, what's going to happen next? Yeah. Who else? Who are the characters? Because it's all about the character. I mean, it's really it's the characters who make the story.
Yeah.
And that's where the interest lies.
That's interesting, because my guess was going to be that your first question was going to be, well, what year do I set it in? And maybe that's your second question.
No, that was actually my first question.
Sure.
Yeah. So I did.
Because we have 1932. That's a pivotal moment.
Yeah.
The Depression. And I guess I'll tee you up. We have the Arsenal of Deceit, which is the newest book. And we jump to another pivotal year, which is 1941.
1941, exactly. It takes place just before Pearl Harbor. Mm-hmm. And as you remember, Detroit was called the Arsenal of Democracy, mm-hmm. because of all the war work that was going on. And we weren't at war yet. The country wasn't at war. This starts out in the early part of the year. So the country was supplying armaments for Britain and for our allies overseas. Mm-hmm. And actually, it was Franklin Roosevelt who first called America the Arsenal of Democracy, and then it sort of became known as Detroit became known as that. Mm-hmm. And as I was looking through the research, I discovered that there was a tremendous amount of fascist activity in the city at that time. Mm-hmm. Much more than I realized, certainly. And I mean, I'm not a historian, so
sure.
This was all this was all filling in my understanding of
Right.
Of what was going on. But there was a huge a huge amount of fascist activity at the time.
And this is something called the fifth column.
The fifth column, yeah. Which is fifth column is a reference to enemy activity that happens within a country, for example. There was a lot of pro-Nazi, pro-German activity in Detroit.
Wow.
There was a lot of Christian nationalist activity in Detroit, where you had very militant Christians who were wanted to upset the status quo, wanted to get rid of Franklin Roosevelt, wanted to get rid of the Jews, wanted to get rid of blacks, really wanted to, much as is happening today, remake the society in their image.
Sure.
So I was very struck in my research by the similarities between what's happening in 1941 and what's happening today.
Yeah.
So that became the sort of glue that held the book together. And again, it's based on actual facts. It starts just before the 1941 Wildcat walkout at Ford, which is the spark that sort of got Henry Ford to recognize the Union, because he was the only one who hadn't by that time. And there's all of the groups that are mentioned in the book, the people who are associated with these groups, the crimes that happened are all actual groups, people, crime, with one exception, which I will talk about in a second.
Oh, sure.
But it's very much based on actuality. I read the newspapers of the day and found out what's going on. What are the top stories? You know, who's doing what. There was also at the time a lot of political corruption happening in the city of Detroit. There was a huge scandal because it turned out that highly placed people in the Wayne County prosecutor's office were looking the other way as a result of payoffs. So they weren't busting houses of prostitution. They weren't busting illegal handbooks. There was a lot of stuff that they were just not doing anything about.
Sure.
Because they were being paid off.
Right.
So there was at the time in 1941 there was a huge trial that was underway. I think something like 40 police and prosecutors were on trial. Very highly placed people in the Wayne County. So I built that in too. It seems like there was a lot going on there in 1941.
And there's even a fourth element, because I at least know that in 41 we're only 2 years away from a riot that's spurred out of racial violence.
Exactly.
And there's some of that brewing in here.
Exactly. And in fact, there was the big riot in 43.
Right.
And there was another riot in 1942.
Oh, interesting.
Which was connected with the Sojourner Truth Housing Project, which is something that the book takes up also. And the book didn't go far enough to actually get to the riot, but one of the characters in the book gets involved with all these people and infiltrates the sort of networks.
And this is Clarence, who's...
Well, it's Clarence and it's also Elizabeth.
Right.
Clarence finds out that there's an attempt to foment racial violence,
right.
And he does what he can to address that.
And again, learning more of the bigger picture of history, he's an officer in what is a segregated unit of the police.
Right.
Yeah.
Segregated units assigned to Black Bottom and Paradise Valley. And Clarence actually appeared in Savage City, too. So Clarence is based on a real person, based the outside of a real person.
Sure.
He's not. He's a maybe not character. Internally, but so one of the one of the characters is trying to discover what's going on with union violence, anti-union violence.
That's Ava.
That's Eva.
Yeah.
Then another character, Elizabeth, is infiltrating all these pro-Nazi groups. Then another character, Clarence Brown, is part of that segregated squad that you mentioned, who is discovers there's a conspiracy to ignite racial violence. And then the last character is Detective Denny Rankin, who is another Detroit policeman who has been part of the corruption and now is trying to atone for his part of it. So we have all these people, all these things, all these balls in the air that are happening. And gradually, as in Savage City, these four characters converge toward the end and do what they need to do.
Sure.
So
yeah, they're called for heroic tasks, but they're everyday on the ground people.
They're ordinary people.
Right. A lot of this, man, this is the seedy underbelly of Detroit history. I think the Savage City was a really good title for the first book.
Yeah, thanks.
Given what you're doing here.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, there's a narrative about Detroit during the war,
right.
That we were the arsenal of democracy.
Right.
But once you get to the sort of private lives of the people underneath that master narrative, then you see there's a lot of different stuff going on.
Right. But we're also, aren't we, romantically referred to as the Paris of the Midwest at some point, right?
Right.
And what I like about Savage City, and then it goes even deeper with the Arsenal of Deceit, is you might have inklings. You might be familiar with the Purple Gang, or you might be familiar with Ruther and the Battle of the Overpass, but you go so much deeper with all of that.
Yeah.
There's the seedy underbelly.
Yeah, I really get down into the granular history of the city.
Right. But it still has, tell us about what the writing process for this, or just your experience of it, because it still does have some elements, doesn't it, of kind of that shoe leathery detective energy.
Yeah.
There is a kind of like an unwrapping, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
How does the writing of these two books compare in just your feeling and your approach to the way you might feel or approach out like a straight ahead detective novel like the Proust series?
Well, it's a good insight that these are basically sort of unwrapping mysteries. Yeah. One of the reasons I got tired of writing straight ahead mysteries is that as complicated as I was trying to make them with the plots and the characters and the mysteries and all that stuff, there was still something relatively uncomplicated about the plot of it. Something happens, and then somebody has to find out what happens.
Right.
What I did with this book, with Savage City and with the Arsenal of Deceit, is take my own experience as a writer of that kind of story and apply it to a larger vista. So that each one of these characters has their own story and their own mysteries that they have to unfold. And as they do that, they come together at some points in the novel. And the question of this book is similar to the question of the Proust books, and that the question is, how do I live decently in an indecent world?
Right.
And I think that's the question that really underlies these two books and the next book, which I'm already starting to think about. So this will be the Detroit trilogy, or if my wits hold out long enough, the Detroit Quartet. But we'll see about that. But the next one's in the works.
When we think of the hunger strike in the first one and a request for basic human rights, that's also threading through here. I mean, from from page 1, I think, where I think you really nicely describe, I think you're describing auto workers themselves as having injuries from being on the floor.
Yeah.
And do we really value those human beings enough?
Yeah.
As this churn and burn is going on.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And Henry Ford himself thought of them like tires. You know, you wear out a tire and you get another tire.
Yeah.
So that's sort of what we're dealing with.
Yeah. But there's a humanitarianism threading through everything when we think of whether it's fascism or racial violence or anything. That's what we're going for here.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, and the connections to today, I think, are sort of blatant.
Yeah.
You know, and I think one of the lessons in writing the book is that these things might have gone underground because a lot of the fascist activity stopped with Pearl Harbor. But they didn't disappear. And similarly, 1932, the book was about, in part, the Black Legion, which was another white supremacist terrorist organization, an actual organization in Detroit. And we're seeing that in the headlines today. You know, we're seeing Christian nationalism, we're seeing fascism, we're seeing political corruption, and it doesn't disappear.
Right.
I always hear. I chuckle when I hear politicians say, "This is not who we are,"
right,
after something awful happens. And I always think, this is exactly who we are.
Right.
You know, let's not kid ourselves.
Yeah, that's here in this book.
Yeah.
That's so interesting about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, well, I don't know. Tell us more about what you enjoyed about the research process. You had to really dig for a lot of this stuff, I imagine.
I did, yeah, I did. And I found some interesting books. Albert Kahn was the famous architect who designed, it seemed, almost everything in Detroit, but a lot of things.
Yeah.
But he had a nephew whose name was also Albert Kahn, who wrote books about the subversive activity in America. And specifically in Detroit. So he was a big help for me for research. And again, it's that granular sort of what's happening on the day-to-day level that gets just papered over when you look at history.
I hate to say this, but like this, the stakes are also higher than a mystery, and that's no dig against mystery.
No,
because when you have a mystery, and I'm just being an armchair analyst here, it's like the body's already on the floor. We have to figure out who did it.
Right.
But there's like urgency and a chance for like, who knows who's going to make it to the end of the book?
That's right.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, we know we hope Martin Proust makes it to the end of each book.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, you know.
But we know Poirot will make it, you know. So
yeah, I mean that's really the thing with with a literary mystery like that is that there are certain conventions of the genre that you understand.
Yeah.
You understand that the detective is going to survive the book.
Yeah.
You understand the detective is going to solve the mystery at the end. You understand that certain things are going to happen. You understand that the detective himself is a certain character type. And so there's a lot of stuff that's given in a mystery like that, and that stuff doesn't work necessarily in a book like this. Like, you don't know who's going to make it to the end of the book, and one of the characters actually didn't make it to the end of the book in an early draft. But I thought, I can't do that. I've got to bring this character back. So it's a different kind of expectations that you're dealing with, different kinds of genre sort of conventions.
Yeah.
That's partly what was enjoyable about it is flexing my writing muscles a little bit and growing in the book.
And if you know your history, you might have that in the back of your head as you read it. You might know, okay, wow, Pearl Harbor's right around the corner. The riots of 43 are right around the corner. And it feels as though you can sense sand going through the hourglass.
That's
like,
right.
Oh, something's coming. Or a fuse is coming down.
That's right. Yeah, better still.
Yeah. What were there any other aspects about going into historical fiction that you really found fulfilling?
One of the things I liked about it was that it relieved me of the pressure of having to know what's going on today.
Yeah.
I could turn my attention all to what was happening in 1941.
Yeah.
And things like, what did a lighter look like? What did a cigarette lighter look like
Sure.
in 1941 or 1932?
Sure.
What did the streets look like? What did the cars look like? What were people eating in the diners? And so that was a satisfying thing for me too.
Yeah.
Because who can keep up with, or I can't anyway, keep up with today's all the changes today.
There's one small subtle through line from this to Martin Proust that I appreciate that you continue, is that there's a specificity of place. You're often going to tell us exactly where we are, cross streets and everything.
Yep.
And maybe the buildings that the characters are inhabiting at that cross street aren't even there anymore, but
That's right.
you're putting us there on the page.
Yeah, that's right. And people have read these books and say, Detroit is another character
Yes.
in the book, in both Savage City and in Arsenal of Deceit.
Right. And a reader coming to this, and this must be the case to a similar extent with the LA Quartet, is that the stories, especially in symphony as a foursome, character checking in on each story as we go and seeing the big picture.
Yeah.
It feels like that urgency is there. It feels like it has huge, possibly worldwide consequences. Like the stakes are very high, and yet it's all contained in this microcosm of Detroit.
Yeah.
And granted, Detroit, big square mileage, but this is just one city's story.
Yeah.
I almost found myself thinking, what was going on in Cleveland in 1941?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So one of the things I think I'm proudest about in both the new book and Savage City is the historical specificity and the historical accuracy, which is not to say that everything is absolutely perfect, but as much as I could get, it is.
Do you have any words of advice, or maybe specifically encouragement, to any writer out there who maybe they were already toe deep or knee deep into their own work in progress that is in historical fiction, and they're already exhausted by the research, or maybe someone wants to try historical fiction but they're daunted by all the research that it would take?
Yeah.
What got you through it? You just found it fun, it sounds like.
It was fun. It was fun, yeah. Because this has been a characteristic of me in my writing life. I like learning things and then writing about it.
Yeah.
That was talk about the through line. That was the through line in my writing career, and my career as an instructor, as an English professor.
Yeah.
I like to teach people. I like to write about things that I learn about. So I guess my advice would be to make the research enjoyable for yourself. If it's not enjoyable for you, it's not going to be enjoyable for a reader,
Sure.
and you won't finish the book. I mean, you won't finish the story that comes out of your research.
It's kind of a journalistic approach.
Yeah.
Or a journalist, rather, just taking all these facts and arranging them into the narrative.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right. And the narrative is imaginative. It's not, it's made up. All the good stuff is true, but it's how you manipulate them and how you weave them together.
Was it overwhelming to contain? This is the second time you've done it, so maybe you've got the knack for it now. But I think containing even just one character's arc can be tricky. I almost wondered if you had a corkboard somewhere or a blueprint where you're just keeping them all in track.
I had notes where I would do that.
Sure.
I've tried blueprints and I've tried outlines. I've tried outlining books, and they just don't work for me.
Yeah.
So
and that's important. They don't always work for everybody.
No, that's right. That's right. So I worked. I always have a sort of sense, a general sense of what the narrative arc is going to be. But this book surprised me because I thought it was going to go one way and it didn't go that way. So I thought if it's surprising to me, then it's going to surprise a reader.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so did you say you're already cooking up ideas for another one?
I am. The next one's going to take place in the 50s.
Okay.
I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen or who's it going to happen to,
Okay.
but I'm starting to put the pieces together, and I'm starting to see what was going on at the time that I can use.
Yeah, I think like 9 or 10-ish year jumps are always good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the same people will be in it or not, but there may be different people.
Do you think you can make it 4, or you just seeing where it goes? Just see where it goes.
If my energy holds out and my wits hold out, which is sometimes not a given.
Yeah.
Then I'd like to do 4. I'd like to bring it up to the 60s.
Excellent.
So we'll see.
And this book came out, I think, in the summer somewhere, June, I think.
It did. Yep.
I'm sure it's available at BookBeat.
It's
Our
available
good old
at
BookBeat.
Yes, it is. And the Proust books are available at BookBeat also.
In Oak Park.
In Oak Park.
One of our great local bookstores.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You have anything else you're looking forward to in the months ahead?
I've actually got a poetry book that's coming out in the beginning of next year.
Nice.
West Vine Press is a press that's associated with a bookstore in Muskegon. And the editor there asked me if I would be interested in having a book of poems, because he knew that I write poems, or I used to write poems anyway. So I said, sure. So this is going to be a collection of poetry. It's called Are You Listening?
Okay.
Selected poetry.
Selected, okay.
And it's going to come out beginning of February.
Okay, great.
So that's what's next.
That's great. And do you think you'd ever catch that poetry bug again in the near future? It's kind of
hard to say.
Yeah. I mean, it's its own thing. It's its own craft.
It
it's
is,
like,
really.
And you have to really get into that mode.
It really is.
Yeah.
And when I was writing one of the Proust books, I thought I would warm up each day by writing a poem.
Sure.
And I quickly discovered that that's not going to work.
You can't take it lightly.
No,
you really
you can't. You can't.
Yeah.
So that's, I may.
And that's coming February, you said?
Coming February.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, Donald Levin, thank you so much for joining us again.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Arsenal of Deceit is the name of the book, and we'll have more information in the show notes, especially about the most recent book, Savage City, and then also this one, which is the continuation of the historical fiction. And we're enjoying it, Donald, so please continue.
Thank you.
We're looking forward to what happens next in the 50s. You have listened to another episode of A Little Too Quiet. It's the Ferndale Library Podcast, and it's brought to you by the Friends of the Ferndale Library. My name is Jeff Milo. I can't even remember if I introduced myself at the beginning of the show, but you should know that if you're a regular listener. And if you want to find out more information about how you can support this podcast, go to ferndalefriends.org. Of course, we thank John Duffy for giving us music to open and close each episode. And remember, please rate, review, subscribe, and leave a positive review. It would help us find more listeners. We'll be back next week with more. Thanks for listening.